Chapter 13. Prophecies and their fulfillment. Prophecy is not intended to open the future to idle curiosity, but for the higher purpose of furnishing light to those whose faith needs confirming. The revelation of future events may be needful in times of discouragement to awaken or sustain hope, to inspire confidence in the midst of general backsliding, and to warn of evil threatening the faithful. Unger's Bible Dictionary, page 892. Prophets and prophecies are mentioned hundreds of times in the scriptures, and for a good reason. They are the seers of the future to warn, admonish, and help mankind prepare for future events. Unfortunately, however, such spiritual beacons often go unheeded. A prophet is usually defined as a man of God or as a mouthpiece for God. Thus, he is considered as a person delivering a message from the true God of heaven. Amos said, "The Lord God has spoken, who can but prophesy?" Amos 3:8. Here, then, is a distinction among many men who claim to be prophets, seers, and revelators, but they never receive the words of prophecy and revelation. There may be 1,000 claim to be prophets, but only one may have the true gift of prophecy. How strange that in the 55 years that Bishop Coyle operated the mine, he was continually making prophecies and seeing them fulfilled, but it seemed that no one else could make the same claim. The prophecies of Bishop Coyle were not given for entertainment nor curiosity, they were meant to convey a message of warning and instruction. If this generation fails to benefit from them, they justly deserve the consequences. The purpose of this chapter is to quickly review some of John Coyle's prophecies, so that the readers can be more aware of their message and learn from them. The author worked with the bishop at the mine for about 2 years, and has personally seen the fulfillment of many of his prophecies, and he talked with others who saw the fulfillment of nearly all the rest. The following prophecies, though not necessarily the greatest, deserve mention and serious consideration. 1. Mobs in the mission field. John Coyle was shown in dreams that mobs would harass the missionaries. Twice they came just as he was shown, but he avoided conflict because he had been shown what to do. One of these prophecies concerned J. Golden Kimball, the mission president. 2. Operating the mine. Bishop Coyle was shown how to operate the mine, where to start, and what they would find along the way. The workers in the mine reported finding the very formations, colors, and conditions that had been foretold, and at the time they were to discover them. 3. Men and money at the mine. The bishop was promised that he need not worry about help at the mine, nor money to operate it. Both men and money would always be forthcoming as the need arose. For 35 years, from 1914 to 1949, regardless of wars, depressions, inflations, opposition, and persecution, the mine had manpower when needed, and always was able to meet operating expenses. 4. Cars like boxcars. When the automobile was in its beginning stages, Coyle said they would become as big as railroad boxcars, and would have something like eyes on them. Today we see thousands of huge cargo trucks on the highways, with headlights that look like eyes. 5. The water ditch. The bishop instructed workers to build a small ditch that would be big enough to carry the water they would find. The miners dug the ditch, and at the exact distance described by John Coyle, they hit the water that just filled the ditch. 6. The Mexican temple. When the church announced that its next temple would be built in Mexico, the bishop said it would not. A year later the saints were driven out of Mexico, and the next temple was not built in that country. 7. World War I. Bishop Coyle described a great world war in which the United States would become involved. 10 years later World War I began. Coyle said that the 145th Artillery, most of which were Mormon boys, would not see action. Even though the 145th was sent to the front line, they did not engage in battle. 8. Depression of 1929. The bishop told his banker in Spanish Fork that in 4 months there would be a terrible depression. 4 months later, October 29, the Great Depression began. 9. Shutdown and reopening. The two Nephites told John Coyle that the mine would, from necessity, be shut down, but that the powers that shut it down would be the same powers to reopen it. 6 months later the bishop was told by the general authorities of the church that if he continued working and selling stock at the mine, he would be excommunicated. The bishop obeyed their injunction and closed down all operations at the mine. After 6 years, President Heber J. Grant sent a letter to the bishop, requesting that he open the mine to pay off a large bill at ECMI. 10. Joseph Fielding Smith's sermon. Bishop Coyle told J. Golden Kimball to go to J.F. Smith and ask him not to deliver his conference speech against the mine. Unwillingly, J. Golden went to President Smith with the request, and was surprised to learn that Joseph Fielding had not told anyone about that sermon. And so he never gave it. This was one of J. Golden's favorite dream mine stories. 11. End of World War II. Shortly after Pearl Harbor was bombed by the Japanese, Bishop Coyle said it would be exactly 3 years later before the war would end. 3 years later, in August 1945, the Japanese gave notice of their surrender. 12. The powder mill. The bishop foretold of a huge manufacturing plant that would be built near the entrance to the Springville Canyon. Many years later, when the war began, a huge powder plant was built on the spot and remains there today. 13. Mark E. Peterson. When young Mark E. Peterson was made a member of the Quorum of 12, the bishop said he would be the worst enemy the mine ever had. Mark Peterson soon began a constant tirade, with both verbal and written statements against the mine. He also wrote up a denial of the spiritual nature of the mine, and forced Bishop Coyle to sign it. He then instigated a trial to have John excommunicated from the church. 14.3 Men would die. The bishop said that 3 men would die at the Dream Mine. After nearly 100 years of operation, exactly 3 men had been accidentally killed there. 15. Muddy water. John Coyle said muddy water would someday flow through the streets of Utah from one end of the state to the other. In 1983, heavy snowmelt and rains caused water damages throughout Utah, in over 29 counties, from one end of the state to the other. 16. Kennecott, Geneva, Tintic standstill. The bishop said before the mine would come in that Kennecott copper and Geneva steel would shut down, and the Tintic mining area would come almost to a standstill. In 1985, records showed that all 3 occurred at the same time. 17. Wall Street boost. Bishop Coyle said that Wall Street would have a major drop sometime before the total failure, and at that time the government would step in to help save it. In October 1988, Black Monday, the stock market came to within 2 hours of total catastrophe, and the government stepped in to prevent it. 18. The beacon light. The bishop described a beacon light that would someday be placed at the top of the Dream Mine mountain. Years after his death, the telephone company placed a transmitter and a huge beacon light on the top of the mountain that can be seen today. The greatest prophecy that Bishop John Coyle ever made concerned the coming in of the mine and the white city that would be associated with it. The Dream Mine was to produce a vast fortune in gold at the time that this country is being devastated by a financial depression, famine and war. There are hundreds of prophecies, dating back to the days of Joseph Smith, about the collapse of this nation. The important difference is that the bishop's prophecy is the only one that has shown how the Mormon people would be able to survive these terrible judgments. If there is no hope of relief from Bishop Coyle's mine, then we have little hope left. From the heads of our government down to the back alley criminals, this nation has filled its cup with iniquity. It cannot survive much longer with such corruption and crime. As has been foretold, this nation must serve God, the true and only God, or they should be swept off. Ether 2:8.